You're listening to the Cash Podcast, creating affluence, success, and happiness with your financial surgeon, Adam Koos, President and Portfolio Manager at Libertas Wealth Management Group at libertaswealth.com.
All right, everyone, welcome to the Cash Podcast. And today we're going to be giving away tips and rare, not so well-known advice on how to not only avoid taxes on the sale of real estate, but how to create passive income where you don't have to worry about the terrible T's. And what are those? That's toilets, tenants, and trash. Now, that's not for everybody. You know, some people don't mind owning big pieces of whether that's real estate, commercial real estate, whether that's residential real estate, big portfolios. And I know people who've owned real estate all the way into their 90s, and they were completely happy with that. But what we're going to be talking about specifically today is the art or the science, I guess it's a little bit of both, we probably all agree, of avoiding those taxes while at the same time creating passive income that isn't so much work. So I've got Greg Smith, Regional VP at IPX1031, and Rachel Alley, Principal and Team Leader at the Millenium Group, Keller Williams Capital Partners. And we're going to be getting into the weeds on how you can sell your residential or commercial real estate, avoid taxes on the sale, create passive income for the rest of your life, all while passing on those assets to your heirs, also tax-free. So we're also going to get into some update on some trends in the real estate market. So make sure you stay to the end. Rachel's going to give us a little update on the state of the market, so to speak. But Greg, Rachel, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having us. It's great.
Thank you.
For sure. All right, well, let's jump right into it. Greg, I'm going to start with you. Tell me about the different types of properties our viewers and listeners might own, properties that apply to our discussion today.
Yeah. So in a 1031 exchange, you're allowed to sell any type of real estate that's either used in business or held for investment. And then you can trade that for any type of real estate used in business or held for investment. So on the relinquished property side, you might have somebody selling a residential rental property. They might be selling an office building. They might be selling farmland. And when they go to the replacement side, if they sold farmland, they could buy a commercial office building or a shopping center, or they could buy the DST that we'll be talking about throughout this conversation.
Okay. Now, I'm going to pivot over to you, Rachel. So why don't you go over the difference between being an active investor? I mean, I'm not sure if I'm using the right terminology here, but I call active investors versus being a passive investor.
Yes. So an active investor is typically someone that has rental properties, they have tenants involved. Even if they have a property manager, they're still actively making decisions for the property. So they're maintaining the property, they're collecting rents, they're securing tenants, they're fixing problems as they arise, or making repairs, improvements to the property to keep it rented and keep it going. So really actively involved in renting out and allowing that asset to cash flow. Passive is an opportunity where you kind of get rid of having to fill vacancies, review tenant applications, collect rents on a monthly basis, coordinate or make decisions on repairs. And so it really moves you into an opportunity where you can own real estate, you can build wealth through real estate, you can build income through real estate without having to actively be involved in all the decision making for that real estate property.
Okay, that makes sense. And obviously, real estate's a great investment. I always say that I don't know too many ultra wealthy or even just high net worth individuals, business owners or not, that don't own real estate. So it's a great investment. And one of the many great things about real estate is the fact that it's such a great estate planning tool. So, Greg, from a tax standpoint anyway, I mentioned the terrible T's earlier. Explain to our listeners, those watching, how real estate steps up in cost basis at the death of the owner and what that means from an estate planning standpoint.
Yeah, that can be such a beautiful thing. That's when 1031 exchanges become a home run, because what can happen in our industry, we use the term swap till you drop. So always exchange, never pay those taxes. Someday when you do pass away, now that property gets into your estate, for 99.99999% of people, there's going to be no estate tax due. The taxes go away on your real estate at the estate level. Then you leave that property to your, favorite son or daughter or whoever your heir is. And that person gets the stepped up tax basis that you just referred to, Adam. And that means that if the property's worth $500,000 at the time that you pass, they receive it at the value of $500,000. Where if that favorite daughter said she didn't want to manage that property, sold it the next day for $500,000, it's a completely tax-free deal to her as well. So that's a real home run. The taxes truly go away at that point, and it's a beautiful thing.
So whether it's one property, multiple properties, commercial, residential, let's just say a portfolio has a cost basis, meaning the total cost of that portfolio of real estate is $1 million, and the investor decides they want to sell it for $10 million before they pass away. Obviously, taxes are involved, right?
Yeah. If they sell it while they're living and they don't exchange, they're going to get crushed by all those federal and state level capital gain taxes.
Okay, and we'll get into that in a second. So the step up in basis is essentially if they own those assets through their passing, then that $9 million profit, so to speak, can then pass on to their heirs, or as you put it, their favorite heirs, without paying any taxes whatsoever.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Now, Rachel, I understand that you've been hearing sounds like maybe even for years now, I could be wrong, that how some real estate investors, they get to a point in life where, they're tired of dealing with the maintenance, the financials, the organization of owning investment properties, all the things you just mentioned. And worse yet, in many cases, while they may love it, they find that their beneficiaries, their heirs, their family, they express at some point that they don't really want to inherit a portfolio of properties, even if it's one property for that matter. And this is where things get interesting and the tax strategies get fun. But is that kind of what you've been experiencing this past few years?
Yes. So I always describe it as, how your parents have a bunch of stuff in their house and they think it's valuable and they think that someday you're going to want it. Like it's going to be like their collector items, or I think everybody has that grandma that had a bunch of porcelain dolls. So real estate's kind of like that way, where the house sells, but the kids don't always want the stuff. And when you're building a portfolio or you're building an investment portfolio for real estate, what I find is a lot of my clients, by the time they get to retirement, if they've invested in real estate, they don't necessarily need to sell that property in order to live their retired life. And so they go on actively managing these properties and hoping someday, they'll leave this for their kids, or it becomes where you become involved there, Adam, is really kind of what is that plan for the property. But we find a lot of the kids, they're busy. They're busy with their own families. They're busy with their own lives. And sometimes they don't even live where the properties are to be able to actively jump into managing them. They don't know where they left off. They don't know what the tenant leases are. Like there's a lot that gets involved in that. And so really they're like, okay, we thank you for the legacy, but we don't necessarily want to own or manage the property. And I think a lot of things get lost in between. So really utilizing a 1031 exchange and that tool gives the owners, or I guess the legacy owners, the opportunity to avoid that capital gains tax while still benefiting from all the investment that their family made.
Do you ever find clients that they want to sell, but maybe they don't know about the 1031, and or they never sell because they want such a high price for whatever it is they're trying to sell, because they're trying to make up for that extra tax that they're going to have to pay?
What I find is most people are, when they start to age in life and they move into retirement, and and we live in Ohio, so a lot of people move to warmer states, so they leave some of their real estate behind, and they're almost like afraid to sell it or afraid to have the conversation, because all they think about is, if I get rid of the real estate, I have to pay all the taxes, and that impacts, whatever structure they put in place. So really, people are just not educated enough, and we're not talking about it enough, what the opportunity to exchange real estate is and really create a retirement plan that works for you while also being able to leave a legacy for your family.
And the same can be said for commercial. We'll talk about a case study later, but you've dealt with those as well, correct?
Yep, absolutely. All kinds of different real estate.
So let's talk about, Greg, the solution, I guess, and these strategies specifically, which is obviously something you specialize in. Granted, all of us, all three of us work as a team here. Rachel takes care of the valuation analysis, helping the client sell their property. I help with investing the proceeds, picking the appropriate, passive investment vehicle once the property is sold. But there's it's kind of like that little saying about the dash, right, on somebody's gravestone. That dash in between is a pretty big dash, and it's pretty important. a lot of legalities, a lot of rules, and that's where you come in. So that important part in the middle that needs to be handled. Let's talk about that. Starting with all the different taxes one might pay, because capital gains tax, for instance, isn't just 15% anymore these days, is it?
That's right. A lot of people think 15% because they think, okay, the long-term capital gain rate's been 15% for a long time, but they forget that things get tacked onto that automatically. There's state tax that's involved. In Ohio, it's about 5%. But if you're selling property out in California, for example, it's over 13%. Mm-hmm. So it can be very significant at the state level. There's depreciation recapture that people forget about. That's a 25% tax on the total of depreciation credits you've received through the years. So that's on the idea that your property's crumbling away. But if it doesn't crumble away and you've done well and it goes up in value, Uncle Sam wants his money back. So 25% tax on that can be brutal. And then there's a 5% addition to that 15% long-term rate if you hit certain high income thresholds. There's also a 3.8% tax that got added from the Affordable Care Act that also kicks in on a whole lot of deals. So taxes are much, much higher than people think.
And they can all be avoided.
They can all be avoided.
How
That's
about
right.
that? Yeah. Let's talk about the concept first before we get into the how to do that of like-kind property. Rachel obviously deals with both, but I mean, maybe you can both chime in here. What is for the sake of this discussion, like-kind property?
Okay, well, I'll start, and Rachel can certainly jump in at any point. But like-kind in 1031 land simply means any kind of business or investment real estate can be traded for any kind of business or investment real estate. So like-kind was a much more important concept with 1031 before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, because we'd be handling exchanges on aircraft and business equipment, all types of things that weren't real estate. So you'd have to trade aircraft for aircraft, but you can trade real estate for real estate. So it doesn't, again, we mentioned this earlier, but doesn't have to be a residential property for a residential, doesn't have to be a commercial for a commercial, anything for anything, as long as it's either got a business use for you or an investment use.
So it can be, if you own several properties, physical real estate, obviously, if it's commercial, if it's residential, it could be one big property and that's it. Whether you're self-managing it, paying a property manager, I'm sure, Rachel, you've probably seen everything across the gamut there. Bottom line, if you're done with the, toilets, tenants, and trash, and you want a 1031, what are the basic rules that everyone needs to understand when it comes to executing a 1031 exchange properly? Because I think it only takes screwing up a couple things, and you can, all of a sudden, you're throwing a bunch of tax in your lap.
Sure. So the first thing you got to know is you do have to work with a qualified intermediary. Our company is the largest QI in the country. So the role of a QI is, number one, first and foremost, to hold the funds. So you're not allowed to touch or control the cash. So when that sale takes place, even if the title company holds on to the money and you say, just hold it for a while, I'll come back and we'll do this thing. No, the second you even have a right to receive the proceeds, it's a taxable sale. So before the sale closing takes place, the qualified intermediary gets assigned into the deal as the technical seller on your behalf. And even though we typically don't need to go into the chain of title, it's still important that we're there and the papers are signed so the IRS will accept the exchange. So that's the first thing, is get your qualified intermediary in place before that sale goes. We'll get the paperwork done. We'll set up a new bank account for the funds to be sent to from the title company. We'll get everything done that's required by good old Uncle Sam.
And then tell our viewers and listeners, about the time limits that need to be met, because obviously those are crucially important in order to make this 1031 go smoothly.
Right. The vast majority of 1031 exchanges are delayed exchanges. That means from your closing date when you sell your relinquished property, they give you 45 days to identify what you may want to buy, and they give you 180 days from that closing date of when you sold to get closed on your new property. You could buy one or more properties, but you have to be closed on everything by day 180.
And it could be physical real estate, obviously, because we're not just talking DSTs here. It could be Rachel could find another property anywhere in the country, let alone Central Ohio, is where we're at, obviously. But that would qualify as well, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's very typical in one of our deals where, let's just say a client sells a property for $1 million. They go out and Rachel finds them exactly what they want for $600,000, but they don't want to pay taxes on the other $400,000, which would end up being taxable boot. So that's where Adam can throw that money into a DST for them, and they can be happy and stay 100% tax deferred.
Kind of a hybrid strategy there. So why don't you touch a little bit more on that, because I was going to ask that in the future anyway. So one of my follow-up questions here, but so obviously it's important to not only stick to the dates, which I believe, did you hit on both of those dates? The
45 and 180.
45 and 180, you hit on both of those?
You mentioned those. Yes.
Okay. And then when we've got a 1035, the entire amount in some way, 1031, the whole amount in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, that's right. To get 100% tax deferral, you need to do two things. You need to reinvest all the net proceeds that come out of the sale. So in other words, if you keep any of the cash from the sale, they'll tax you on whatever you keep. Then secondly, if you paid off any mortgage debt with your sale, so let's say on the closing statement, you paid $200,000 to the bank for what they were still owed, then that $200,000 needs to be represented on the replacement side, either with a new loan for $200,000 or more, or if you want to add additional cash, you can do that as well. But yeah, you've got to match that up to get 100% tax deferral.
Paying off the loan might be a problem.
Paying off, well, you pay off the loan when you sell that original property. That's part of it. But then on the new property, if you wanted to have no debt on it, you'd have to add additional cash to make up for whatever you paid off to the bank.
Right. So in some cases, it might make sense to keep debt.
Just goes out and gets the same debt again.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was getting to, is that you probably want to retain debt in some cases, maybe I don't know about all cases, but in many cases. I know what it is. Rachel knows what it is. Obviously you do, but in the simplest way possible, explain to everybody out there, what is a DST? We keep using the acronym. We haven't even explained what the acronym stands for.
That'd probably be helpful.
Yeah, you'd think. So DST stands for Delaware Statutory Trust. And the basic idea is that a large company like Inland, for example, out of Chicago, a big company like that acts as a sponsor. They'll go out, they'll acquire some blue chip piece of real estate. It might be a giant apartment complex. It might be medical office. It could be a dozen Walgreens and CVS's across the country, all different types of properties. But typically they're in the $25 million to $100 million range, where the average investor, Rachel and Adam are very successful. They can do anything, but an average person like me, I can't go out and spend that kind of money on property. So for average people like us, we love the idea that, wait a minute, we could buy a piece of that investment. So maybe I've got a couple $100,000 coming out of my rental property sale, and I can invest that couple $100,000 into a DST where this company such as Inland has gone out, they've acquired it, they've usually put debt on it, and then they sell it off in pieces to normal investors. So that's the basic idea behind a DST. Now, they're sold as securities. So, that's why Adam comes in. You have to be a, licensed securities financial planner of some kind in order to offer that product. And so, it's not something Rachel directly gets involved in. That's where Adam would come in, just like Adam won't sell you the property down the street because Rachel's licensed to do that.
No, I will not. I'll probably do it.
I think that's so important that people understand having the right financial advisor or financial team that can really help provide those opportunities or talk to you about them. I think a lot of people just aren't having the conversations.
Totally agree. Yeah, that's why we're doing this. I'm willing to bet that most people who own real estate and are tenured investors probably know what a 1031 is. By the way, 1035 is an insurance exchange. There's no shortage of tax jargon in our industries, unfortunately. But yeah, 1030. I think most probably tenured investors probably know what a 1031 is. But I'm willing to bet that most don't know of these strategies to create passive income without having to do any of the work. Now, again,
I'll tell you, most agents don't know how to advise their clients on using that tool.
Would you say that most agents are aware of the strategy at all?
No.
Okay. Well, that's good.
I'd say most aren't. If you've been in real estate a little while, you've probably heard of it, but you might not know exactly how it works or how to really add value to your clients and advise them on that.
Yep. Well, I'm glad we're doing this then. It's just not only is it going to help investors, it's going to help agents as well. I didn't even know that. So
yeah.
So yeah, so you've got this, these properties you own. Just to kind of recap, you don't want to pay taxes on it. Maybe it's because you're done owning the real estate. Maybe it's because you just want to, buy different property in a different state, perhaps. You're just tired of owning property in Ohio, and you just want to buy new property in Florida after the hurricane. Let's just say, you want to buy a new property you want to sell your properties because your kids don't want them when you're gone. This is where the DST comes into place. We hire somebody, and I'm glad you brought up the team approach, by the way, Rachel, because I mean, yes, I feel like I'm good at what I do, and I know, Rachel, you're good at what you do. Greg, you're awesome at what you do. But it's like we all have our own lanes on the highway, so to speak. And I tend to believe in hiring professionals to do what they do best and staying in my own lane. But we have a huge team, not just on this podcast, but of several professionals that help create solutions to, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, keep our financial houses in order, and do things in the most efficient way possible, not just from the standpoint of creating and growing our wealth, but transferring it and doing so in the most tax efficient way possible. So as we talk about this DST, again, just recapping, we sell our property. Greg takes over in terms of, making sure we've got a qualified intermediary in the place so that nobody's touching the money. It stays qualified. Rachel sells the property for the client. Now we're looking for an investment on the other side, which could be physical real estate. Maybe it's DST. And if it is a DST, I know some of the things that I like are things like multifamily, single family rentals. I like storage units, industrial warehouse space. The internet is not going away. Neither is online shopping. Greg, what are some of the others that you have any favorites? I guess I hesitate to say favorites like you're endorsing them per se, but any DSTs that you've worked with recently?
Sure. We certainly see everything across the board, the things that you just mentioned. I would say, one of the nice advantages is, let's say you like multifamily, and you're sitting in Columbus, Ohio, as an example. It suddenly becomes easy to own multifamily in Charlotte, in North or South Carolina, in Texas, in California. So it allows you to be diversified, not just in the types of properties that you own, but also the location, much easier when you're buying into these nationally syndicated products. So, but yeah,
that's one of the challenges we've had, Greg, is people that are thinking about selling their multifamilies or starting to sell off their portfolios or their rentals, trying to identify another active property within that short amount of time, especially coming out of the last couple of years where inventory has been so low. Unless they're really engaging with agents or opportunities in different markets or across the country, this has been a really great solution for a lot of our clients.
Timing. Yeah,
absolutely.
Because we're all up against the deadline.
So we've got, the product we might use. I want to bring this up too, because I think it's important. If somebody, an investor, decides to 1031 real estate into another physical property, they defer the tax, right? If they want to 1031 again, they can, right?
Absolutely.
Right? So they 1031 again. What if they 1031 into a DST, and then eventually that DST liquidates, it sells? Now, can we 1031 again?
Absolutely.
We can keep. What would you say earlier, Greg?
Swap till you drop.
Swap till you drop. That's right. Yeah, never pay those taxes. I don't like paying them, so why do it? But yeah, after a DST, let's say it runs 5 years, 7 years, whatever it might run in a particular case. If it's done well, you might be quick to just roll over to the next one, and that's a great thing to do. So we see most of our clients do come out of the DST and roll into one of the next offerings. So you always have that choice. If you wanted the money for some reason, you could take that and pay your taxes at that point, or you could take it back and call Rachel and find the property that's the more physical property that you're going to control and have active management responsibilities with. So you can still go whatever way you want to go, just as you could with any property.
Or as you mentioned earlier, you could do both. Again, that kind of hybrid approach is, I sell something at $1 million. I've got a basis of 200,000, which means 800,000 is taxable. I find a property I love with Rachel. She helps me buy it, but the problem is it's only $800,000. In other words, it's kind of funny when you think about that, by the way. The problem is it's too cheap, right? Yeah. So I've got this $200,000 boot that I have to worry about, and that's where we can use the DST as well, as to avoid all the tax.
Absolutely. Yep.
So
That's
then,
right.
important point for everybody to understand: we can keep deferring our taxes out, buying more, whether that's real estate, physical real estate, or DSTs as they liquidate. Another thing I want to point out, because this is a common question, is rates of return, performance, yield, things like that. So what you can expect these days on a DST's return. So you sell your physical real estate, you 1031 into a DST, you can expect about 3 to 3.5% per year in yield. So that's passive income. Another company, the sponsor, Inland, Greg brought up earlier, for instance, they're managing everything. You're not doing anything but taking a check. And then at the end of the day, when that DST liquidates, however it liquidates, doesn't really matter how, then you're going to get back a profit. And that profit typically runs somewhere between, I'd say, 4 to 6%. So a total return, probably looking at 7, 8% per year annualized. And when it liquidates, then you just 1031 into another one and you start the process over again. Now, once the 1031 is complete and the investor owns non-traded real estate, they pass away. And when they own it, it qualifies for that same step up in cost basis we were discussing earlier. So now they're not paying any taxes on that either. So if the portfolio started at a total cost basis of 2 million and it's been sold for 15 million, and we've been deferring taxes for 10, 15 years, and now it's sold for 20 million, and the person passes away, or that owns this real estate at that date of death, that's the new valuation from the standpoint of cost basis for tax purposes. The only tax that the heirs would pay on that DST or physical real estate would be any growth that occurred from the date of death on, which is typically going to be virtually no taxes at all. Would you agree with that statement, Greg?
Yeah, I think so. Now, when we're getting up to really big numbers, then we've got to look at, is there going to be any estate tax and
Death
so
taxes.
on. But with good tax planning, you can go into pretty huge numbers and still avoid the taxes. So,
well, when we start talking about total assets exceeding $24 million, that's everything you own. Now we're starting to get into things like trust planning, charitable planning, irrevocable life insurance trusts, and things like that to avoid the death tax. Ohio anyway doesn't have a death tax. It hasn't since 2010. And the feds, you have to have quite a bit of money in order to, I hate to say, qualify for the taxes if it's some hurdle we're all trying to achieve. But anyway, let me change gears here. Talking about, Rachel, you call it the market of the moment. Yeah. People are unsure, especially with everything that's happened in this real estate market recently, interest rates in particular, inflation, the kind of hurting our wallets. Mm-hmm. What's going on today? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of change in a short amount of time. And it's interesting because we see all these headlines of, the market's going to crash and lots of forecasters about what's going to happen. I think we're all kind of flooded with everything from the news to social media and everything in between and telling us how the world's changing quickly or the real estate world's changing quickly. And it's interesting because I think we can all agree the last 2 years of real estate have been on fire here in Central Ohio. It's something like we've never seen before. And so we all knew it wasn't going to stay that way. And then when it starts to change, it all feels different or it feels scary. So we're kind of getting a mixed signal market right now. That's kind of how I'm describing it. And when we look at the data, and our data is about 30 days behind and the market's kind of changing pretty quickly, but we jumped up interest rates a couple percentages in a short amount of time. That was really in an effort to slow down the inflation that we were seeing in the real estate market. I know some hyper-local pockets of Columbus itself. I was looking at 15, 16% appreciation last year, which is awesome.
Pretty awesome, yeah.
Harder if you're buying. So
sure.
Some of these things are taking effect and consumers are really kind of hesitating. And we're starting to see some of the data trend a little bit backwards, or we're starting to see those indicators of change. So we're starting to see inventory jump a little bit from no inventory, everything gone in a weekend, to maybe about a month, which is still very, very favorable. We're starting to see days on market creep up a little bit. We're around 2 to 3 weeks on the market right now.
Still good though. I
know it's kind of funny to say out loud that these are the changes that we're seeing in the market right now. And at the end of the day, the good properties always sell if they're priced appropriately and there's value there. And so we're starting to see these indicators of change kind of hit the market. I think we can all agree that we're moving into a market that's probably slowing down or maybe more normalizing. I think we quickly forget how a normal market operates when you're running in the fire for a few years. So looking at the data and looking at how things are trending, we're actually starting to trend back towards a pre-COVID market. So the data is starting to kind of, inventory's jumping up, days on market are jumping up, average price per square foot starting to slowly incremental take little adjustments down. And it's really, if we overlay the data, we're looking kind of pre-COVID 2019, which at the same time we could probably all agree was still a good market.
Sure.
Now, nobody knows what the future holds. I think some of the challenges or the issues that we have are different this time around, but that's kind of the market of the moment.
But you don't think the market's crashing?
I think no, I don't. I think we would be naive to think it's probably not going to, it's going to get better from here on. I think we're all knowing it's going to probably change, or things are going to slow down, or it might get a little bit worse before it gets better again. But we don't have a lot of the systemic issues that we had the last time the market crashed. It was like a perfect storm.
Yeah. I've got a quote in my conference room because a client a long time ago bought me a crystal ball. It doesn't work, but it's on my conference table just for fun. And then I've got this quote that stays on the whiteboard, and it says, "Prediction is especially difficult, especially when it's about the future."
Well, and I think we can all agree, if you invest in real estate and you plan to hold it for a long period of time, which is truly the intention of investing in real estate.
Investing period, actually.
Investing period, right? Yes, investing period. I think if you try to time the market or you try to time your sale, that doesn't really work out well, because you're never going to quite time it. Nobody can. Otherwise, if we could, we'd all probably be rich and we wouldn't be here. We'd be on some like island in the middle of the ocean. So really just having the perspective that if you invest in real estate and you let it grow over time and you allow someone else to kind of fund your wealth through rentals or whatever that may be, that's what we're looking at, the long-term strategy of it.
Well, I've touched on it a little bit earlier, but can you describe what your role is, maybe in a little bit more detail than I did when it comes to these 1031s, helping people avoid taxes, get that passive or active income for that matter, and so on?
Yeah. So a lot of times this process starts with a financial advisor, and that person is, planning with their clients about the properties they have, what their retirement plan is, what that's going to look like, and starting to move these pieces along. So where I jump in is I have a lot of advisors that will ask me, hey, if you were to value this property, what would you place a value on this property? Or what would it potentially sell for? And working with the homeowners to view the property, look at different sales scenarios. Does it make sense for us to sell it with leases in place and occupied? Or does it make sense for us to vacate the property, renovate the property, and then renew leases to get it to a better cash flowing, or, have it look better on paper as far as the saleability of it? And so that's really where I jump in, is kind of the front end advisory role. Like, here's your options for selling. This is potentially what you would get at each tier of selling. And this is what I recommend is the best strategy to move forward.
Okay.
And then working with you to say, okay, what is the timing for this? Does it make sense for us to sell something this year or next year, or move into a 1031 exchange? Really understanding what the goals of the clients are.
And long-term planning as well. Yeah.
Long-term planning. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for both of you, we were just doing a presentation last week in front of a bunch of business owners, and we were talking about, or you two specifically were talking about a private medical practice you just dealt with. So I thought it would be kind of the best way to finish this whole podcast up today would be for you to kind of share that story as almost a case study from beginning to end. I think that would probably really help viewers and listeners understand how this process works, to see, to hear the story of one that just happened in real time.
Absolutely. So I'll start because I feel like it probably started with me and then we got Greg into the mix. But so they're clients of mine. I've known them very well for a long time. They run and operate in a private medical practice. And a few years ago, they contracted out with a management company, like a healthcare company here in Central Ohio, to kind of start taking over management of the practice and leveraging that part off as part of their retirement plan. And private practices, if they've been around a while, they typically own the real estate in which they operate. So we have this 10, 12,000 square foot private medical practice where they're practicing out of it, but they also own the real estate. And so it was kind of twofold of getting them out of the management, but then at some point knowing we would have to address the sale of the real estate as part of that kind of retirement exit strategy plan for all the partners involved. At that time, they were kind of testing their relationship with the the company that was taking over the management of the practice, everything went well. And so we saw it as an opportunity to go ahead and renew leases. And that's where we really revisited the marketability of the property. Obviously, it's going to be more marketable or more intriguing to a top dollar investor if we have longer leases because it secures tenants at a certain rate, and it kind of protects the investment of a buyer if they're looking at the property. So really worked with the clients to help them navigate and secure longer term leases. And then as soon as we got those secured, I knew it was the prime time to market the property for sale, knowing who our buyer was ideally going to be. And it ended up being a buyer out of Chicago. They were looking for medical practices to add to their portfolio. They were looking for operating assets. So worked with another broker in a different state to kind of market this nationally. We're able to secure the buyer and then obviously move into contract and help them kind of negotiate, navigate, understand the different terms and conditions. Obviously, when you're selling a property of that caliber, there's lots of paperwork, lots of questions, stuff flying back and forth. And then once we got into a secure contract, that's really where we worked with the financial advisor and Greg or as the intermediary to make sure that we were setting up the steps prior to closing in order to work through that 1031 exchange, which I think ultimately we ended up landing in a DST with those clients.
Okay.
Because they wanted to retire. They didn't want to move their money into another property and have to actively manage that.
That's right. So from our standpoint, Rachel let us know about the deal, sent a copy of the contract, let us know the title company that was handling the closing. We have the title company send us a copy of the title commitment. And then once we review the contract and the title commitment, drafted up the documents, got those out to Rachel and her client. They have to sign those anytime at or before the time of the actual closing. We set up a new bank account for those funds to be sent into after the closing occurred. And then from there, of course, that's where the 45 days and 180 days begin. And they were pretty quick on finding that DST investment. And same idea from our standpoint. Once they know what they're going to buy, whether it's a DST or a standard, bricks and mortar type property, we're going to go out. We're going to talk to that title company, get the contract, title commitment, review those, draft up the little bit of paperwork needed for the back end, and then get the money wired in for the purchase.
And then it's off to the races.
You got it.
Yeah.
And it sounds that easy. It's just that
it's
easy.
Not, obviously.
Obviously, there's low hurdles along the way, but
well,
that's
and I think maybe the punchline or the moral of the story is at the end of the day, if you're a prospective or potential client watching or listening today, as far as you're concerned, it is that easy. The whole goal is to try and make this as simple as possible, or as I always like to say, it's not easy, but it's simple. There's a difference.
And I think it's important to understand starting these conversations before you need to be there. Right. Does that make sense? Like starting the conversations about how to transition the assets or sell the assets or put them as part of your retirement or legacy plan. Sometimes it takes a couple years. I mean, we started this conversation the beginning of 2020. We just sold May of 2022. So this was about 2.5 years of a process to get to the ultimate end.
I think in a perfect world, we have plenty of time to plan, and this is done strategically. However, Greg, I believe you and I were meeting for lunch just recently, and I believe you said the vast majority, though, am I wrong that the vast majority you said are kind of like they've already sold the property and now it's not a fire sale, but it's kind of an emergency. We need to do this now.
Yeah, they're all over the board. We get a lot of calls, probably more than one a week, where we start talking through the deal. We make sure it makes sense. And then they kind of say, oh, by the way, we're at the closing table right now. We say, all right. That's not ideal, but get a cup of coffee, have them send us the contract and title commitment. We'll take a look at those, draft up the documents and get those out to you. So it can be done in a lot of cases, but there's also cases if there's going to be a complication. Yeah, let's not deal with that last minute. Let's talk as early as we can, make sure that we don't have to turn this into a fire drill.
Right.
But I think a lot of clients that I speak with, like they don't know how to close the loop a little bit. They go to the closing table and they don't have something identified yet.
Right.
But reminding them that you do have time, you just have to put these steps in place. So you don't have to exactly know where you're going. You don't have to exactly have, like if you want to be an active investor, you don't have to have that property or that rental identified yet. But using the DST as a tool to kind of be a fail-safe, which I think a lot of clients can lean on as well.
Absolutely.
Yep. That all makes sense. Well, I think that's probably good for today. We can probably do another one of these down the road, maybe in spring next year or something. We're definitely going to do another live event here in Central Ohio next year for owners of real estate, landlords, business owners that own both residential and commercial real estate. And we'll probably follow that up with a redux of this discussion, maybe getting into more details or different details perhaps. But if you'd like to get a hold of Rachel, you can get a hold of her on her website at columbushousetohome.com, or you can email her at rachel@millenniumregroup.com. That's like RE as in real estate, obviously. So rachel@millenniumregroup.com. Greg, you can reach him at IPX1031.com, or his email is greg.smith@IPX1031.com. But that's it for today's show. If you know somebody, or maybe someone yourself, you yourself or somebody you know wants to maybe you own real estate, you think you'd benefit from this episode, please, by all means, feel free to pass it along. Of course, please feel free to reach out to both Greg and or Rachel directly with any questions that you might have. If you and or your business would like some help selling, exchanging properties, that's what we're doing. That's what we're talking about here. And if you're looking for assistance with retirement planning, estate planning, putting all this together for your family, your business, please feel free to reach out to me for a second opinion on your financial plan. Our website is libertaswealth.com. And you can schedule something in our calendar there, or if you'd rather email us directly, you can do so at info@libertaswealth.com. So as I always say, there are thousands and thousands of podcasts out there. You chose to give ours a listen or a watch today. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Cash Podcast with your financial surgeon, Adam Koos. To see any charts or images that were mentioned in this show, or to check out additional articles, videos, and other educational resources, head over to libertaswealth.com.